Okay guys, with the release of the safety fence, I'm sure on everyone's mind is whether that thing will truly protect you from the menace known as Legendary Sigurd. Well, this video may convince you that you may actually need quite a bigger fence to keep you safe from the sort of shenanigans that Legendary Sigurd brings to Aether Raids. Let's dive into it.
Let the lesson begin.
Hey guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is, as you probably no doubt can tell from the intro and the title and the thumbnail, that we're going to talk about the safety fence. However, this video is more or less a first impressions kind of discussion video, opinion piece on the safety fence, and I've kind of just feeling it out. So the intent of this video is just to get us thinking and how important it truly is to meta and what sort of decisions you may or may not want to take both on offense and defense. Okay guys, so yeah, I think I'll probably have a follow-up to this video with a more in-depth way to use safety fence, probably on offense and to some extent on defense. Any of that stuff in more detail, of course, because it's more, you know, back and forth. You can find me on other places like Twitch, of course, where I'll definitely be discussing it probably after this video. I'm gonna probably keep up with my document on Patreon for those of you guys that want to support the channel. I do show that off on Discord and on Patreon. And of course, if you enjoy this content, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't, because that always helps the videos. That's about that for now. Let's jump into my thoughts for safety fence, what it is, and what it means to you. First of all, if you don't play Aether Raids, then this probably doesn't mean anything to you. Like if you're auto-dispatching or generally speaking, playing Aether Raids pretty casually, this won't really affect you. And to be honest, it probably won't even help you very much. And you'll probably understand why as I go through this video, but the safety fence might be a little bit overhyped, or it might be a little bit too much of a gut reaction in thinking that it might literally save you from Aether Raids and the sort of teams seen here. So if you aren't familiar with Aether Raids' current meta, basically it's full of cavalry, there's dancers, auto recovery, and save skills are also involved with all this, with a touch of Pathfinder and 7th unit and a lot of rally shenanigans. All this complications definitely doesn't make it very beginner friendly to jump into, but I'll try to break down whatever I can here and make this sort of easier to understand. So with the release of the safety fence, essentially what it does is it lets you be safe for the first turn, assuming you're within its range. So there's this little green image, like the tiles you can see are green highlighted below on the safety fence as it's clicked there. Those are the spaces. It's basically just one row above it and the row that it's in with the buildings if you choose to bring less buildings. That right away I can tell you is that it's a good idea to actually bring as little buildings as possible if you choose to use a safety fence. I learned that really fast because you can definitely use those extra spaces for not only smiting and making plays into turn 2 or potentially turn 1, and we'll get into that. But essentially, you want to use a safety fence to be safe. Another thing that isn't mentioned is you can actually just be completely out of danger area of your enemy team, and they won't do anything. There is no 7th unit shenanigans, nothing like that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I have other videos that cover those sort of AI interactions. But essentially, as long as you're within the safety fence area or out of all enemy danger area, that red space you see over there, you will basically cause the enemy team to end their turn on turn 1. That is essentially what it does. It sounds pretty good in theory, and this is where, you know, things get interesting. I would say, just like from a first impression, without even like jumping into some of the specifics that I will talk about in this video, is it helps, but it doesn't solve a lot of the problems with some of the biggest meta teams. It does enable like really different types of strategies, which is always welcome. Counterplay is good. I felt like auto recovery didn't have counterplay. We have that now. That's good. And it also enables newer strategies like gravity. Like basically gravity and run is nice. You can literally hit and run now, both from a range perspective or a melee perspective if you're using Near Trace or Gale Force. If you can snipe dual heroes, you can use Lin and hit and run out back into safety range, safety fence range, or out of the enemy danger area should you snipe a key unit that has a lot of range. So there's a lot of cool new plays that can happen with this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to all of a sudden win against all these teams, because there's a lot of factors at play here that I think I will go over during this video. Okay, so first off, I want to show you guys just kind of like a blackboard with some notes that I can help you guys follow along. If you don't know what that whole turn 1 ending looks like, if you haven't seen the visual yet, it literally looks like this. It's like that whole lock mechanic on all 7 units right away. As I said, as long as you're within that safety fence green area or outside all danger areas or it doesn't really matter, you're going to get this effect. So that's your visual there. I do want to talk about the safety fence, what I think it means to the game, and show you guys in testing what I came to as a conclusion for both F2P and more premium players. As I said, this likely warrants another video in more depth with good units, access to different things that you may start thinking about what you'll use, but just to help you think, or just not react if you feel like all of a sudden you need to summon and invest in all this stuff, because I'm already kind of doing that in advance, just actually having fun with it, mostly just having fun and investing in different things, seeing like what works and what doesn't, or how hard it is or how easy it is to execute certain strategies. I'll try to talk about whatever I can in this video, and of course feel free to like let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll definitely read along and maybe get some ideas off of that. Alright, so let's talk about what I think the safety fence means to the game before we go into a little bit of my testing and my experience using it. It's the first day, so obviously there's more to expand on here, but basically what I'm very thankful for with the safety fence is its counterplay to odd recovery. Those of you that have been playing FEH for a very long time, and to like a lesser extent even Aether Raids in like the first year, you will know about the Fire Sweep Terror. And when I say Fire Sweep Terror, I mean literally Spring Breeze Fire Sweep without Null Sea Disrupt existing or Peony to give you more flexibility in trying to optimize your scoring. I have some really old videos on the channel showing some of this gameplay where you basically had no way to counterplay any of this because Null Sea Disrupt didn't exist. Fire Sweep was rampant upon different cavalry units on melee. Spring Breeze had like 4 unbreakable blocks, and you didn't have Peony to give you flexibility with mythics. That was a terrifying meta because you had no option but there wasn't even Disarm Trap. You had to player phase those units or somehow have some sort of tank that could take 0 damage from everything, which is very unrealistic because you'd usually get lunged into traps, poison striked, and just nonsense upon nonsense where you would most likely lose despite really good play or preparation. That is almost, I would say almost what we came down to with the whole odd recovery meta. Because what essentially happens if you don't follow this sort of pattern with intelligent systems is they like give a problem, sell a solution. Give a problem, sell a solution. And they keep up this pattern time and time again. Think of it like this. So we had like Isolation, Bridal Fjorm, Mila. The counterplay to that was like stacking HP or stacking defense. You couldn't really do both on most characters. Elegant's a blessing, but for the most part you couldn't really do that. So odd recovery comes out. Solution, yeah. Then here we are now. Safety fence, which isn't necessarily selling a solution. It might not look like it from a direct perspective, but if one of the more dominant strategies of, let's say, the safety fence and people take advantage of it is hit and run, at least with range units, then something like Far Save is pretty important for defense. Now, I'm not coming to this conclusion right away. Don't get ahead of yourself. That may not actually be the defense meta or anything, but it's just something to think about. They could be pushing a certain way for people to spend orbs or spend money and influence the game. They've been doing this forever, literally since Reinhardt and Bike Days and Lin, you name it, man. The game has basically been Fire Sweep, Null Sea Disrupt. It's been like this back and forth forever. What I'm saying here with odd recovery is I'm glad we have counterplay now, because Isolation, odd recovery was the counterplay to that, but there was no counterplay to odd recovery. You couldn't really do anything against these teams that run you down on turn 1 besides try to hide or maybe engage them turn 1 and try to like totally trap and gale force them. Those are basically the best plays against this sort of stuff. But with the amount of bulk, the amount of units, the limited space, and just the amount of range that the enemy team had, it was very difficult to play into these maps, and you gotta be thankful you have 6 ladders. At the end of the day, you might just not have the team to make it work. So I'm glad that exists now, and I'm glad safe defense is free, and it's not like some sort of 5-star exclusive mythic or something to provide counterplay for auto recovery. It's a good thing. It's definitely a good thing, especially since it's free. Now, another thing I really like about safe defense is it provides better or less frustrating setup. A lot of the auto recovery teams is you literally had to like engage turn 1 or hide turn 1 if you could by like just every single space in the back row had to be like free and hide as much as you can. I like that you can basically destroy some buildings, put your units exactly where you want them to be for turn 2, get your isolations in, set up your smites, maybe your dancers, buffs. All that stuff is much easier when you have an additional turn to work with. So that is very comfortable in testing. When I've been playing against these teams, I could be like, okay, I know exactly where I want to isolate the next turn, where I want to throw in one of my units to start the train going. It's very, very satisfying in that aspect. Finally, it will likely change the meta. I don't think it'll change it that much. And once I go into some of the images here that I'm going to provide you with on why it probably won't change it that much is because, honestly, it's not that easy to use. When I think about Aether Raids or just like the easiest form of playing Fire Emblem Heroes' perspective, it's literally tanking and PvE type of gameplay. So your end turn, I don't care, what the numbers are, my tank is good, I win. This is why far save, near save, like stacking stats and such is just ridiculous, because it's not really like, there's not much engagement. You just basically throw in a tank and end turn. With PvE, you're basically just creating a super nuker and just AoEing or killing everything with a bunch of dancers. This is like the Ninja playstyle. And of course, Far Save was like the answer to that. So those are pretty easier playstyles to play. And definitely if you can use them, you should, because why go through the amount of math and ridiculous amount of setups you need to do with some of the harder strategies if you don't need to do that. But having those extra strategies is always a good thing. So here's why safe defense matters. Because those other strategies where you can set up a Gale Force or some sort of sweep or something, Vantage or AoE or whatever, just setting those up now with safe defense is possible and satisfying, but they're much harder to execute. Not only do you need more premium units, 5-star exclusive stuff, like Valoria is an example, Raphael, Nyla, Bridal Nyla, Queen Camilla now, whatever. Gravs, all these like premium units exist for this sort of strategy that will definitely take advantage of a safe defense. But that's not accessible to everyone, and on top of that, it's not that easy to execute. It may look great when you watch a 1-minute video, but in reality, without a lot of practice and experience doing it, it's not that easy to execute, and it still requires a lot of preparation, checking the math to make sure you get the kills, a lot of stuff that just isn't really involved with a big nuker just sweeping the team, or in the case of a tank, just end turn and hope hit wins with just mass amount of stats. That's why I think it'll change it slightly. So those people that want to do those strategies are going to feel good about having a safe defense. Those that don't, well, you're just going to keep doing the same thing. And in that case, safe defense doesn't really do anything. Just because you have an extra turn, it doesn't really do that much. The biggest advantage a safe defense does for like a tank player is you're going to be able to isolate the enemy dancer and potentially not die to like the biggest threat on the enemy team, or your support doesn't get sniped, assuming you don't run far safe. That is a decent benefit, but it's not huge enough that safe defense all of a sudden will drastically change the way that everyone plays. That's not going to happen. So I am definitely of the opinion that it'll change the meta, but not that much. Okay, and that does tie into some of the minuses and cons on my node board, which is, again, all these different strategies emerging or possible now are not as easy to, are not accessible, or very difficult to execute. Some other things you got to keep in mind with safe defense is the counterplay on defense does actually exist. So if people, they probably will keep their cavalry teams and auto recovery and such. I don't see why you should. You should definitely use it if you can. There's still good skills to have, and turn 3 auto recovery is still a thing. If people engage you on turn 2, then you have a turn 3 auto recovery, which is pretty good. So counterplay on defense will still exist, and Duma plus catapults now creates a sort of RNG on whether you want to roll the dice on sniping those buildings. So safe defense doesn't cover every single column unless it's centered in lane 3 or 4. If it's put into the more sides, which is like lane 5, 6, 2, or 1, it only covers it covers like your columns partially and leaves some of them empty. This means that the danger area in those spots like let's say lane 6 had a range cavalry and your fence was in like lane 1 or 2, a unit in the lanes there, like the lane 5 or 6 or whatever, would potentially get hit because they wouldn't be protected by safety fence. So what can happen here is the teams can definitely still be running the high danger area cavalry stuff. They can run those catapults, they can run Duma now, and potentially gamble for a chance to hit your safety fence. And then if your safety fence is gone, then there's no way for you to set up besides the old school way of playing, which is hoping that you can survive turn 1. There's even a benefit for the opposing team, which is the safety fence now took up a slot that they couldn't hide in during turn 1. You've sniped it on the beginning of your defense team's turn, and they had one less space to hide, so that potentially creates a more, like even one more opening for creating a kill. So in some ways, it's even slightly a buff if you gamble the like 1 out of 3 of a Duma plus a catapult and Anima Season. This is one of the biggest reasons that Duma stonks are up, guys. Like literally stonks up. I think Duma is probably the best Anima Mythic now, hands down. That's a bold statement, but it truly, that if safety fence and people rely on it too much, Duma is key to countering it, at least providing a chance to countering it. As I mentioned, it changes the meta slightly, so if you don't like to adapt, you don't like to change your defense much, and you don't really like to change on offense or try different things, then obviously it's not going to be fun for you and could be frustrating. So give or take, depends on the person. Now, I want to go into some of my testing and experiences with it. I spent many hours, whatever free time I had, trying to play around with it to see how accessible or how easy using safety fence was. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously setting up. So what I did is I used Yarn, who is not F2P accessible, but don't worry, I will talk about more F2P stuff. I just thought, hey, what Gale Force units do I have in my barracks that I really want to try with this whole hidden run strategy? And of course, the bunny comes to mind first. What I quickly realized is that the traditional Gale Force sort of stuff is very annoying for trying to use safety fence even with your turn 1. So if you're trying to like go in and hit the enemy team or snipe something and then run out using, staying in the safety fence range, it's very hard because unless you're using like near trace or Canto units, which again are mostly premium and not accessible by many people, you basically need to guarantee your Gale Force. You ideally want to actually kill a unit because just hitting a unit and running doesn't really accomplish much, especially if there's a healing tower there and they get healed. And you probably want the premium unit to be merged. In the case here, Yarn would definitely do a lot better if he had some merges and could actually kill Niffle and then like escape route out, he's running escape route, or like just run out and just get danced and whatever. So the actual application of this stuff is the same as traditional melee Gale Force, which is you get screwed over by traps, high frontline bulk units, guard, special fighter, especially if you're trying to use Gale Force and such, and now additionally near save. So all of these, like right away, from a couple of teams that I was using, I'm like, I got to smite onto the trap, I got to win my checks to make sure I actually kill the unit, and then I got to get out. So there's a couple of steps here to even use the safety fence for hit and run for just, I just used Yarn here, but I used a couple of different Gale Force units. This is just the first one that came to mind, just thinking about it, melee. Now you might think right away, why don't I just use like Ninja Lin, or why don't I use Legendary Leaf or Reinhardt or something and go that way? There are many teams, and there's going to be even more teams that use Far Save, and I think Far Save on defense is going to be very common and very good. That will stop that sort of play. So if you're trying to get around it by using Disarm Trap, range units and such, it's going to suck because you can definitely expect traps to like cover melee units, and they're going to use Far Save to protect their team, and therefore your range unit for sniping is generally not going to work. So I feel like melee has a bit of advantage here if you can truly make it work with near trace or some sort of premium unit that has access to like Canto, such as Regan's going to be really good here, and that sort of thing. So another example here that I also did was basically I sniped under dual peony there. I sniped a Ninja Lin actually on the front line, and then I was able to use escape route from Yarn here and get completely out into safe defense range. This did actually help me win the rest of the game because I was able to then kill Peony on the next turn, and then there's no Dancer, so that was really convenient. As I said, next turn I basically smited him in, killed the Peony, escaped the route out, and now there was no Dancer, so it was just a basic cleanup at that point. So it can work, I'm just showing you, but again, you need to really check numbers here, like Heavy Blade, Gale Force, do you use Escape Route, is Fury good, which unit do I use? There's so many variables here that don't compare to the sort of like, I'm gonna tank with a huge Brave Hector, or I'm going to use Ophelia and just AoE the whole team with like 2-3 Dancers or Ninja Lin, right? Which is why Far Safe is good, by the way. But moving on. I'm showing you that it can and cannot work, but the numbers have to work out, and the execution isn't as easy as you might think. So for those of you that are like, okay, so is this just Yarn being ridiculous? No, I did actually try this with Elwood, who I think is probably the best F2P option for this. And my Elwood here is very weak. I'll actually show you the build in a couple of screenshots, but essentially this is like a +1 non-resplendent Elwood with like Deathblow. So he actually surprised me. Like, he can win against Not, especially if you have Resplendent or even just a bit more investment than I do, and he can run essentially the same thing as Yarn, which is Escape Route and Get Out. He has a special acceleration, he has Impact, and he has Guard, which is really good, and that makes him a pretty solid candidate for doing this sort of thing. So again, you smite him in, snipe some units, and then just get out and use the safe defense's safety to basically set up easier times cleaning up on the next turn. So it can work. It can definitely work. But again, it does come down to checking numbers, investment, and that sort of thing. As you can see here, I was able to snipe some Rashida with a smite in, and then I could potentially kill Not if my Elwood was way more invested. He's +1 with like Deathblow, so that's not really that good, but if people who have more invested Elwoods, and I probably will invest in Elwood even harder knowing that this is possible, can definitely pull this off really well. As you can see, go in, get into 50%, and you could definitely do all this to set up an actual full Gale Force clear if you had the team for it. Like, you could definitely just run Wings of Mercy on a bunch of units and just do a traditional Gale Force. But the added option of being able to run out with safe defense is really cool, that I definitely am trying to talk about here. So there is the build in question, 6 attack buff. That is Mythic Blessed with, I believe, Ullr, Air, Peony, and Mila. Which is really good for speed, which you definitely want, but him playing into frontline Knots is not too bad. He actually has some pretty solid speed to be able to compete with that, and if you invest into an F2P unit for trying to do this sort of strategy, melee, hit and run Gale Force, no near trace shenanigans, no premium units or anything, I think Elwood is the first unit you should consider for this, truly. Especially in light season, where he actually does pretty well against Knot. Another example shown here is basically, I set him up for going into Not there, just smite onto the trap. Even if the trap was high damage, he would actually be able to probably take a hit, especially at higher investment. And then the same shenanigans happens. You can escape route out or Gale Force into a better position, and you clean up from there on your later turns. As you can see here, I can basically set up and kill. That's a far save, Felix, by the way. And you can set up for a cleanup on the later turns. As I mentioned in my Ullr analysis, Ullr has a terrible matchup against Hell, and it's funny to see that in action here, but I did end up cleaning up either way. But just wanted to give you guys the attention that safe defense deserves. This is mostly a first impression and discussion video. It probably went on for quite a while, but if you did make it all this way to the end, then I appreciate you for watching and trying to get as much knowledge out of this. Again, I'm going to follow it up with more specific strategies. For an F2P player, definitely expect me to cover Elwood, because I feel like he is the key to making full use of safe defense. There are some range units and such that you can play around with, but I don't think they're going to be that great, to be honest, because far save is going to be far more common than near save. A lot of the testing I did, I found far save all over the place, but I did not find almost a single near save. And if you did run into a near save, then you probably just end turn that team anyways with like Brave Hector or just some tank, because they're not going to have danger area. So that pretty much gives me like enough experience to kind of give a first impression here. Hopefully you got something out of this. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. That helps the channel. So if you haven't already, if you love this content or maybe just like it a little bit, consider the Patreon. There's an Instagram link as well. I'm more of a social being lately, so you can go and follow me there if you want to. And I will probably be streaming right after this video if you happen to catch it on its release. So further discussions will happen there, plus more testing through mock battles. Love you guys. See you in the next one. Peace.
It's over.